people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of his fight this weekend, unbeaten up-and-comer Rashidi Ellis on facing Jaron Ennis. I'll fight Mike Tyson in his prime, if the money's good.
That's the caveat.
But how good does the money have to be for an unbeaten up-and-comer with no profile?
No following, no fan base.
How good does the money have to be? Rashidi Ellis was quoted as saying, I'll fight anybody. If they're paying, I'm playing. So I don't care who it is. Shit, I'll fight Mike Tyson in his prime, if the money's good.
But how good does the money really have to be for a fighter that doesn't have a following and is still trying to establish themselves?
He's a good fighter, Ellis said of Ennis. I'm not going to hate on him. That's why I think it'll be a great fight, a super fight. People are sleeping on that fight, but right now I'm worrying about my fight with Villa.
Whoa, super fight.
If you're talking like this now at a time when barely anybody knows you, even real hardcore boxing fans, degenerate boxing fans that watch almost any show, any card, if you're talking like this now, what are you going to sound like later?
And how much money is it going to really take to get you in the ring with this guy later on when they can't get you in the ring with him now?
There's a time and a place for this kind of talk, and I don't get the sense that the time and place for that kind of talk is right here and right now, it being that Ennis versus Ellis would have been a much better chief support.
Yeah.
A much better co-main event to the main event than what we're actually getting, and who's really interested.
You know, Denzel Bentley versus Felix Cash, that was a battle of the unbeatens, as was Joe Joyce versus Daniel Dubois.
More recently, the Frank Martin versus Michelle Rivera fight, that fight that took place right there on Showtime.
You know, a lot of the time, those kinds of fights, they are a necessary evil. Granted that you may be opposite the ring, a high-risk, low-reward opponent, but sometimes that's the only way to make waves, to separate yourself.
Rashidi Ellis sports a professional record of 24 wins, no losses, and no draws with 15 knockouts.
29 years old. I think the most high-profile win on his resume is his unanimous decision win over then unbeaten Alexis Rocha.
Rashidi Ellis used to be a Golden Boy Promotions fighter on the Golden Boy Promotions side of things, but in April of last year, he migrated from Golden Boy Promotions over to the PBC. Now, I remember over a year ago, there were some rumors and rumblings that Rashidi Ellis, whilst still on the Golden Boy Promotions side of things, rejected a fight with Virgil Ortiz. Now, we never got confirmation of those rumors, but based on how he's treating a Jaron Ennis fight, I think at minimum, that lends credence to the notion that the fight might have been offered to Rashidi Ellis.
It lends credence to the notion that he may have very well rejected that fight.
Rashidi Ellis himself stated, you guys act like Jaron Ennis has 5 arms or something. He's just a fighter, just like me. But in spite of what Rashidi Ellis is saying, you know, one of the more interesting nuggets that has since been revealed in the buildup of this weekend's fight is that Ellis acknowledged he asked for twice the purse offered to him to face Ennis, but he stated that the offer wasn't a lot.
Well, how much do you think you're supposed to get? You're no ticket seller. You're not a marquee fighter.
Rashidi Ellis, the last couple of years, has been a sparsely active fighter. He fought only once, just once in 2019, only once in 2020, sat out all of 2021, and he only boxed once last year in 2022. That was his first fight under the PBC banner after having migrated from Golden Boy over to the PBC, and the question is,
what are you supposed to pay this guy?
How much does he want? How a fighter and how his management, his team, treated situation all really depends on whether or not they like his chances opposite the ring a particular fighter.
If you're opposite the ring a guy like a Villa, you're not going to ask for a lot of money because you like your chances, and the fight itself is little more than just a formality. But when you're fighting a good fighter, a Jaron Ennis or somebody like that, well, you're going to ask for more money.
Because it's a harder night's work, and Because, let's be honest, your team may not like your chances, so they want some compensation, just in case things go sideways. So I said it in my last video, and I'll say it here again. In order to make an omelet, you have to crack a couple of eggs.
Pressure makes diamonds. You keep these fighters under pressure, one among them, may prove to be quite valuable. But when that's not happening,
When the fighters aren't under pressure, when they don't have to be at their sharpest, and they are fighting in relatively low-risk fights, safe fights.
well, I'll tell you what, that's not going to stimulate the audience. That's not going to create interest.
Really isn't. Though without a figure, without an actual number to gauge whether or not Rashidi Ellis was out of line for wanting 2 times as much money than he was offered to box Jaron Boots Ennis, we can't necessarily accuse him of pricing himself out, though at the same time,
At the same time, what does he expect?
he's 24-0 with 19 KOs, 29 years old.
At some point, you got to bite the bullet. At some point, you've got to gamble. Beating Jaron Boots Ennis would do more for his profile than beating Roman Villa.
Stop me when I tell a lie.
Which fight would you rather see?
Jaron Ennis himself was quoted as saying, "The big names are coming. I just have to be patient."
A unique situation when it comes to Jaron Boots Ennis. He may fight on the same side of the street, the same platform as a lot of recognizable welterweights, though he himself, he's not a PBC fighter. Rashidi Ellis is.
You think that might be a part of the reason he didn't have access to that guy? Do you think that might be a part of the reason that fight didn't materialize? Jaron Boots Ennis was quoted as saying, "At the end of the day, patience and timing is key. You've got to wait your turn just like everybody else. Like I say, everybody's pay-up is different to a world title, and mine is just taking a little longer. But I know it's coming, and I know I'm going to be a world champion soon."
Winning a world title in and of itself, that's not always enough to turn you into a big marquee attraction, a big marquee fighter. There are any number of world champions in the sport of boxing, but not all of them can draw. Quite a few of them can.
And quite a few of them are world champions. You could almost say in the case of Jaron Boots Ennis that he needs a signature fight a little more than he needs an alphabet title.
A little, yeah.
I feel like Errol Spence Jr. would fight me. I'm going in there with the intention of winning the interim title, then fighting Errol next. I think we can make it happen.
I think you're wrong. I think it won't happen.
I think a lot of other things would happen before Errol Spence Jr. shares the ring with the Jaron Boots Ennis, because he's a high-risk, low-reward fighter for a marquee fighter, a marquee welterweight like an Errol Spence Jr. What's in it really? What's in it for Errol?
That's what he's going to be telling himself, his team, his management.
They might decide to leave the welterweight division altogether. It doesn't look like we're going to get the undisputed title fight between Errol and Terrence, and if we're not getting that, then what's the point of staying at welterweight?
He might not. He might move up.
Jaron Ennis was quoted as saying, "The big names are coming. I just have to be patient." And there's not exactly a proliferation of big names left in the welterweight division. Sean Porter has since retired.
He retired after the Crawford fight in 2021.
2022, Danny Garcia made his maiden voyage to the junior middleweight division. He's not campaigning at welterweight anymore, so that rules him out.
I don't think Errol's going to fight him.
I think Errol's going to move up, and Errol is rumored to be facing Keith Thurman, his mandatory challenger by way of the WBC. So that rules out those 4 guys, those 4 names.
Jaron Ennis sports a professional record at 29 wins with no losses, no draws, 27 knockouts.
25 years old, close to 30 professional contests, close to 30 professional bouts, most of which came against guys.
Jaron Ennis has a lot of fights, but not a single signature fight, not a single one among them.
It's a problem. It's going to be a problem because he fights exclusively on the Showtime platform, and there are several other welterweights there with him on that platform, but he can't seem to get access to them. You saw what happened with Rashidi Ellis, rather, what didn't happen.
Look at last year. All he did last year was the Castillo-Clayton fight. He fought for a grand total of 4 minutes. You're telling me they couldn't get him another fight the whole of last year?
He fought Castillo-Clayton and knocked him out in the second round of their welterweight contest in May of last year. And you're telling me that from May till December, you couldn't get this guy another fight. You couldn't get him a Josecito Lopez. You couldn't get him a Radzov Butaev.
Jaron Ennis provides reassurances that the big names are coming, but there isn't exactly a proliferation of big names left in today's welterweight division. If Keith Thurman ends up fighting Errol Spence Jr. and loses, he's likely going to take another hiatus.
Not that sharing the ring with him afterwards would be any kind of a big deal. Let's say Errol goes in there and he beats Keith Thurman by way of a points decision or by way of knockout.
Sticking him in there with Jaron Boots Ennis afterwards really wouldn't mean much. Ideally, the best time for that fight was last year. You know, Keith Thurman, he rebounded off the loss to Manny Pacquiao with Mario Barrios.
That was in February. A few months afterwards, in May, Jaron Boots Ennis saw action opposite the ring Custio Clayton. So ideally, what they should have done would have been to do a fight between Jaron Ennis and Keith Thurman at some point in the third or the fourth quarter of last year, and obviously that didn't happen.
But we know what's about to happen. Jaron Boots Ennis is fighting a no-name in Chukatsian, and Keith Thurman and Errol Spence, they're gonna fight.
So that ship has sailed. That still leaves Virgil Ortiz, who boxes on the DAZN platform, and Terrence Crawford, who's a network and promotional free agent. But because
Jaron Boots Ennis boxes exclusively on the Showtime platform, is he even gonna have access to those guys?
I can tell you right now, making a fight with Virgil, that's going to be a problem. When it comes to Terrence Crawford, in theory, it should be somewhat easier because he's a network and promotional free agent, though in a situation like that, the onus to make the fight and bankroll it would be on Showtime.
That's your fighter. He fights exclusively on your platform. Terrence Crawford, he ain't got a promoter. He's a network free agent, too.
If what you want for your fighter, Jaron Boots Ennis, is a Crawford fight, what are you ready to do about it?
What are you gonna do?
More interviews. Jaron Boots Ennis himself says that he thinks Errol Spence Jr. would give him a shot. He thinks Errol Spence Jr. would fight him, but a sizable portion of the boxing community at large does not share in that sentiment. They don't think Errol...
Is it my imagination, or is Jaron Boots Ennis handling the subject of Errol Spence Jr. with kid gloves on?
Because it feels like it. Where most of the boxing community doesn't actually think Errol's going to give him a shot. They think he's going to move up in weight, vacate those titles, at which point Jaron Ennis will be elevated to IBF champion. Where most people feel this way, for some reason, Jaron Ennis is saying the opposite. It's almost like he's being coached to say this.
Do you think the people at Showtime are telling Jaron Boots Ennis to go easy on Errol Spence Jr.? Don't badmouth him. Don't make him look bad.
Don't pressure him, even though he's the one you're after. All this time, Jaron Boots Ennis has been fighting in IBF eliminators. He's had this and that to say about Terrence Crawford, when in reality, the guy he seems to be after is Errol.
And I don't think he's going to get him. I'd like to be wrong about this, but I don't think I will be. I don't think for a second Errol is going to share the ring with Jaron Boots Ennis.
So if Sean is retired and Danny moved up, Keith's fighting Errol and Rashidi said no.
Virgil's with Golden Boy and Terrence is elsewhere. To what big names is Jaron Ennis referring to? What big names are really left in today's welterweight division? How big are they really?
I'll tell you this much. The people at Showtime and the PBC didn't think enough of the Crawford versus Spence fight to ensure that it happens, to get that over the line. They didn't think enough of that fight.
And that's a bigger fight at welterweight than any fight involving a Jaron Ennis.
Stop me when I tell a lie. And finally, in men's heavyweight news, Malik Scotch, trainer and longtime friend of former WBC champion Deontay Wilder, said, should Wilder versus Joshua take place, Malik expects a short night. It's a 3-round fight.
There's reason enough to believe that the Wilder people finally want to do this thing, because Wilder's getting up there in age, and there aren't that many big paydays on the PBC Showtime side of things.
I truly believed and I thought that Usyk was going to come to the Helenius fight, said Scott on The Good Fight with Kate Abdo, but Usyk has major plans, only focusing on Tyson Fury. If it was up to me, Wilder would fight Anthony Joshua next.
It's not the first time we've heard Malik Scott say that.
There's reason enough to believe that the Wilder people are finally ready to do this fight, and there's reason enough not to.
Because of how they handled the situation in the past, because of what Deontay Wilder went on to admit, that he could have made more money with AJ, but he chose to fight Fury.
The Deontay Wilder people, at least in the past, spent a long time trying to convince the boxing community at large that it was AJ that didn't want to fight.
That it was AJ and Eddie Hearn sandbagging it. They were dragging their feet and they weren't serious. They spent a long time trying to convince people of that, only so that when things blew up in Wilder's face with Fury,
he'd end up making that admission, that the AJ people offered him more money But if the AJ people weren't serious, then why would they have offered him more money?
That doesn't make any sense.
The lack of mental strength may not be there right now because he lost 2 times to a smaller guy. So to go against that specimen called Deontay Wilder, you may need to rebuild yourself up to take on that kind of a fight, and I get it. But the advantages and the things I see Deontay doing to whatever AJ shows up, mentally tough, not mentally tough, it's a 3-round fight, in my opinion.
Robert Garcia, who trained Anthony Joshua for the Usyk rematch, he said something somewhat similar, that whoever wins, whoever lands first, that's who's going to win.
It's a bit of an open-ended prediction, though. It's not wrong, not necessarily. Both guys punch hard. Anthony Joshua is a stronger finisher than he's given credit for. And Deontay Wilder, he obviously has his reputation.
The disconnect between the two teams here and now is that Eddie Hearn wants to save that fight for the end of next year. He's got a 3-fight plan for Anthony Joshua that may cap off with a Deontay Wilder fight, whilst Wilder and Malik Scott, they seem to want that to be their next fight.
I've talked about this in previous instances. Of course, they're going to say that when they've already had their rebound fight. Not that long ago, Deontay Wilder was coming off consecutive losses, the same as Anthony. But he has since rebounded off those losses with Robert Helenius. And now what they want to do is hit the gas before Anthony gets his chance to rebound. It's a double standard.
People tack on a lot of double standards when it comes to Anthony. They expect him to fight Wilder off of 2 consecutive losses. They expect him to fight Tyson Fury off 2 consecutive losses.
They even expect him to fight Joe Joyce off of 2 consecutive losses. People really do tack on a lot of double standards when it comes to Anthony Joshua, though ultimately, he's not going to face any of those 3 guys in his very next fight.
More specific to this conversation, Deontay Wilder is one of several options for Anthony Joshua, but he's just an option, just one option, because if Tyson Fury ends up beating Usyk later on this year, instead of fighting Wilder,
he might swap him out for Fury. Target him. A Fury fight in the United Kingdom might be worth a lot more money than a Wilder fight.
It might. Wilder's fans barely showed up for his last fight, his big ring return. Only 75 to 77,000 pay-per-views sold.
Don't misunderstand me. Wilder versus Joshua as a fight is still a very big fight, though here and now, based on those numbers, I'm not convinced that it's as big a fight as a Joshua versus Fury fight.
Wilder's air of invincibility, that bubble has been burst.
Seems like he's peaked already. He's reached the height, the proverbial ceiling of his popularity, and he's not viewed in the same scope that he was years ago.
And maybe that's why the Wilder people are placing so much emphasis on fighting Anthony next, because they know he doesn't have that much time left in his career. This guy's pushing 40.
8 or 9 surgeries to the same arm, 2 systematic beatings.
On his own side of things, there really aren't that many paid days left. Just the Ruiz fight, and it's questionable what they'd bring in with that fight.
So you see how it is.